Welcome to the Anti-Library podcast. Today we venture into the field of child psychology and the intergenerational and the environmental factors that go into the making of a child's psyche. We have here with us Dr. Libera Ylenia Mastromatteo. She is an accomplished postdoctoral researcher at the University of Padua, affiliated with the Department of Developmental Psychology and Socialization. Her research expertise lies in applying advanced statistical and psychometric methods to unravel complex issues in developmental psychology, focusing on the well being and social behavior of children and adolescents. She is also a leading contributor to studies on pro social behavior and cooperation, examining how cognitive control influences children's social interactions. So let's go straight to Libera. So, welcome to our podcast, the Anti Library Podcast. We're so pleased to have you. So, a lot of your research has been related to intergenerational trauma, especially about maternal adversity, and how that translates into cognitive, developmental, and behavioral patterns in children. So, let's just start right there. Tell us a little bit about, first of all, because our audience is really interdisciplinary, we want to know what exactly is maternal adversity. And we also wish to know how you got into this fascinating subject and what are the kind of goals and expectations you have in this field. So, briefly about your field.
Okay, so, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the invitation. And well, actually, I really changed the topic because during my PhD, my research was quite different. So I was trying to understand the biological roots of prosociality. So all those behaviors like cooperating, sharing, comforting. So all of those behaviors that are intended to benefit other people. And for this reason, I moved to the United States to work with an expert in this field, Dr. Miller. And so I moved to this very small town in Connecticut where I met many wonderful people, and including like a close friend with whom I had countless deep conversation. And one day, after spending the afternoon at the pool, I was trying to teach her how to swim. A sudden summer storm forced us to take shelter. And while listening to the rain, we were talking and talking, and just we like keep talking. We started also talking about how our past experiences have shaped us and how our families might influence the way we parent or we might parent one day. And at that time, I was working on this different kind of data. It is a very large national representative data set called the Future of Families and Child Wellbeing Studies. And in this data set, there were also information on maternal adversities, which refers to a range of negative experiences mothers may have faced across their lifespan, including, for example, socioeconomic hardship or discrimination or exposure to violence, early life abuse, neglect. So all these kind of like chronic stressful negative experiences. And these adversities, we know from literature that can have long-lasting effects on mental health. And in this data, I realized I had the opportunity to connect different layers of, past experiences. So we had data on mental health of 3 generations. So we had grandparents' mental health, we have maternal mental health, and exposure to adversities. And we also had children exposure to adversities and children's social emotional outcomes, let's say. So my idea was to test a mediation model, so a series of mediation, like how this variable influences this one and how this one is influenced by that one, and so on. Mm-hmm. And I tried to link this different data to see whether mental health difficulties in grandparents made cascade down generation, first influencing like maternal mental health and adversities, and then and how this can subsequently influence children's exposure to adversities and in turn children's mental health when they are 15, so when they are very far from the thing that their grandparents were experiencing. And the results were striking. So we found evidence of a clear intergenerational risk pathway with children's exposure to adversities as a key mediator shaped by both grandparents' mental health and maternal mental health, and this mediator then influenced the mental health of children when they grow up, so when they were 15. So the exposure they had when they were 3, 5, and 9 years old were influenced by their maternal and grandparents' history, and this in turn affect their mental health when they were teenagers, which is surprising by me, in my opinion. And well, what I really like about this field is that by mapping these transmission pathways with precision, so using longitudinal designs, multi-informant reports, and advanced statistical models, we can really identify the points, like the time when we can design intervention that are most likely to break this cycle of intergenerational risk. And so the goal is to try to translate these findings into tools, like practical tools, creating parenting interventions or preventive mental health programs and policy recommendations that can address not only children's needs, but also the well-being of the whole family, like a system. So targeting the whole system, familiar system. And this way, the story that the child inherits is not defined solely by their own adversities or their maternal adversities or, their family history, but it is enriched by resilience, by support, and a lot of opportunity.
Right. That's amazing. So you did mention that you also can, include some practical interventions to help children who you suspect might be having traumatic events in the present, right? So could you maybe provide an example of or two, like what kind of practical interventions, just to give us an idea of what that looks like?
Yeah, so for example, one kind of intervention might be parental intervention. So you basically teach parents how to be parents, because if you think about it, we become parents, but we have no idea what parenting means. So we don't know what it's like, what can harm to like our kids. So creating maybe strategies that can help parents in the specific period of life, especially the first, years which are the best under a certain point of view, but also the hardest. So because you need to learn a new role, you are not alone anymore, you have a lot of responsibilities. So helping them to understand what they can do to make like the best for their children could be really useful. And we can also teach how parents can improve social emotional skills in their children, because in this study that I was talking about, we also found that these skills, so skills like connectedness with others or perseverance, or social skills in general, so the way we can be empathetic or we can help others, can also offset this intergenerational risk pathway. So trying to make parents and children better with the skills can also help to break this cycle.
Right, right. So yeah, that's an excellent idea, and I bet that it works, and you have seen results like working that way, right? Okay. So I am curious to know more about your exchange student experience that you mentioned in the United States. So I'm curious, how does your research experience first in Italy and then in the States compare to each other in terms of the subjects, the methods? You mentioned some of the observations of those and other things. So I am asking you this because when we think of something like child psychology, we think of them in terms of like universal fields. So children behave in this way, react in this way, do so and so. But we generally tend to think of something that pertains to all children, like as a universal field. But do you think that there is a difference in place where the children is born and being brought up? Does it make a difference in the outcomes of your research?
Well, this is super interesting. So I will start with the first part of the question. So I started my research journey in Italy, and when working there, like my work was grounded in clinical and developmental psychology for like the majority of the period. And well, much of the research that I was conducted during my PhD and also during this period was conducted in school settings. So we used experimental tasks, psychological measures, questionnaires, and I would say that the thing that it's really different between Italy and the United States is that like the samples here in Italy, they are really homogeneous. So we have the majority like Italian adolescents with the similar cultural or educational backgrounds, and it's really easy in this study to control for cultural variability, for example. But this also means that certain findings might not be generalized as broadly because there is a lack of these diversities. When I then moved to the United States for my exchange period, things were very different. So the first thing is that there is a very collaborative spirit in the United States. So I had access to a lot of like data that were massive data sets that were collected by many, many authors, many, many research centers, many labs. And you could have access to those data. And if you want, you could also collaborate in the sense that you can add a little piece. So for example, we are interested in studying this, and you can like ask to add your little piece of the research, use like big protocols, which is like very interesting and very useful because research like makes sense to networking with other researchers. We are not so good at this in Italy. And working with these data sets in the United States also meant that I had access to very, more socioeconomically, racially, and ethnically diverse sample. And this is true also because the United States is a country marked by this, social and racial diversities, which is something that maybe it's not so similar in Italy. So, and I think that this differences really shapes both the research questions that you ask and that are raised because, of the different cultural and ethnical structure, but also the way in which you interpret findings. And another very interesting thing that I found is that in the United States, there is a lot of funding. So, and the funding system is also easier to be used, let's say. In Italy, we are usually, slowed down by layers and layers of bureaucracy. And this makes even simple tasks like, purchasing an equipment or paying participants very time consuming and very difficult sometimes. Whereas like the process in the United States, it's faster. So it's, you could feel like the efficiency that there is in the funding systems. And this also translated in a faster pace of the research. You have access to more data, to more participants. And yeah, so these are the two main differences that I noticed. Now, to your point about whether developmental psychology is universal, I think the answer is both yes and no. I mean, the core developmental processes, so like the need for secure attachment, the role of emotion regulation, the importance of peer relationships, these are indeed universal. But the expression of these processes, so the risk, the protective factors that can shape them, these are really are deeply embedded in cultural, social, and also policy context. For example, once again, in the United States, kids often grow up in families that move around. There is this very mobility in the United States that I saw, whereas in Italy, it's not like this. And this movement can also foster, independence or personal achievement because families are also very, involved in their own job, in their settling this new life. In Italy, maybe the idea that being surrounded by these extended family networks that we have, especially, for example, in the south of Italy, where I am from, or the idea that the education system is very uniform nationwide, compared to the United States, where you have different schools, different systems. All these differences can protect children in a certain way, but also they come with their own set of challenges. So both this mobility or these extended networks have both like positive and negative side. So the place absolutely makes difference, both like again in the research outcomes, but again in the questions that are raised by the cultural differences that we have like around us. And this is the reason why I really believe that cross-cultural research is really valuable, because it allows to understand what is truly universal, so the core of these developmental processes, and what is culturally specific. So in this way, we can really design intervention, because this is, my main ultimate goal, to find a way to make research findings into practice. So knowing like how the cultural difference contribute to these developmental processes can really help us to design this intervention that can really work in the context where these children live and grow, because again, they shape in a different way. They might shape in different way children.
Right. And you must have also met like a lot of different people in your field who are also working on similar things, and you might have made exchanges in that. So yeah, that sounds like a great experience. So you have made some observations in your research. You mentioned that some of them were surprising and some that you didn't really expect. So tell us more about some of these surprising findings. Of course, the ones which you have published, or not the ones which you cannot disclose right now.
Well, I also work on another line of research, which is environmental psychology, which specifically it's like how environmental exposure to different kind of, like, for example, pollutants can change child development. So in one study that we published, so it's available online, we found something that really made me think. So we looked at how prenatal exposure, so the exposure that happens while the fetus is still in the uterus, in the womb of the mother. So this exposure to particulate matter, so which is like these tiny highway pollutants that we basically we can't see, but we inhale every day, and how this may affect development, children development. And so what we found is that we followed like a cohort of Italian children between 5 and 8 years old, and we assessed their development across 5 different domains. So we assessed the cognitive, the communication, the social emotional, the adaptive, and the motor domain at 5 and 8 years old. So there was this cohort. And also we were able to reconstruct the exposure of this PM10, so this particulate matter that is below 10 microns, I think. Yeah, and what we found was really, really scary. So higher exposure to this PM10 during pregnancy. So we are not like talking about the children breathing this air, but like the mother. So higher exposure to this air pollutants can affect the cognitive development of children, and also led to poorer communication skills when they're 5 and 8. So prenatal exposure to polluted air, so before the child was born, in levels that are, normal levels here in Italy, which are also present in the majority of the industrialized world nowadays, is linked to a measurable, like really statistically significant decreases in children's cognitive and communication abilities years later. Yeah, this is scary. And for me, this was just more than a scientific finding, it was like a wake-up call. We often think of intergenerational transmission just in terms of genes or family history, but here we are talking about a different kind of intergenerational risk. So we are leaving to our children, to the next generations, an environment that is literally making them sicker even before they're born. And this study really makes me think that protecting child development is not just about intervention at the family or school level. It's also about, collective action. So creating strong public health policies and creating this moral responsibility that we have to hand over a world where children can breathe clean air. They can think clearly, they can thrive, and they can be healthy. And this was one of the findings that really, really moved me the most.
Yes, and now recently, of course, people are waking up to the actual magnitude of what the environmental crisis can mean. So I think that this research is like very important at this point. Yeah, we should really make some efforts, at least if not for the planet, for our kids. That's really amazing, and I see that why you would be surprised and why it would have impacted you, because this is a big find, not a pleasant one, but a big one. Okay, so we as a channel are invested in interdisciplinarity. As I mentioned, a lot of our audience are from different fields, so that's humanities in general, but also from science, cognitive science, and other things. So I'm curious to know, or we are rather curious to know how different types of knowledge or texts can relate to each other in unusual ways. So do you think that the study of psychology can impact and influence other fields of knowledge? Of course, you mentioned how it does have a larger impact on people as a whole, but I'm also talking about the academia, like academic fields and disciplines. Do you think that psychology is like a big part of interdisciplinary studies?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I think psychology has a lot to offer to other fields, and the exchange goes both ways. Psychology, at its core, it's about understanding how humans think, feel, and behave, and this can reshape the way in which we approach our knowledge in areas like history, literature, or sociology, for example. Thinking about history, psychological insight into memory and how bias work can help us understand why certain narrative dominate while others are forgotten, for example. Whereas talking about literature, knowing about cognitive and emotional processes can really deepen our understanding of how a story can affect readers, for example, why certain personality can resonate a lot or can move people more, and how narrative structure can evoke empathy or challenge stereotype that we have about the world or other people. And what is really nice is that this interdisciplinarity is not just about applying psychology to other fields, but it's also about letting those fields, reaching psychology. So yeah, I think that psychology can be both like a bridge or a meeting point between different disciplines. And the really magic happens when we bring this discipline together, and because in this way we not only produce richer research, but we also train our mind to think, in a more flexible way. We hold multiple perspectives at once, and this really drives innovation, and really drives innovation in knowledge.
Is modern psychology as in an academic field, is it accessible to people of other fields?
What
What
do
is
you
your
mean?
opinion on that? To what extent would you say it is?
I mean, it really depends, because it depends because psychology has many subfields, let's say. So if you work in neuroscience, you really need to know about the brain, how brain areas work, where is each brain. So if you want to do a study on, I don't know, the role of amygdala in literature, I would say, well, you better take, brain course first. But in general, yeah, I think that I personally work with a lot of people from other fields. So we work with statisticians, of course, because, we test the models. So we work together. But I personally also work with doctors. I worked with engineer. I work with linguistic people, so people who studied linguistic. And there is a field called psycholinguistic, where you really need to combine the expertise of psychologists and linguistic, because it's like an interdisciplinary field. So yeah, I would say that you can find your spot, but of course, it depends on the subfield where you want to work in, because you need to have at least a little bit of knowledge about, I don't know, psychophysiological processes or brain area, if you want to work on this topic, of course. I personally am new in the neuroscience field, and I'm really studying a lot because I took few classes about this, and now I am doing all the work that I haven't done in the past.
So is this in relation to your current research? I would like to know more about your current research, as far as, again, you can tell us.
Well, if I had to put a single thread on all my work, I would say that I'm looking for the earliest, most reliable signals that tell us a young person might be heading toward the field is. So whether those signals are in the brain, in the body, or in the environment around them. And yeah, for me, this means going beyond the visible symptoms of in the clinical, let's say, aspect of a pathology, a psychopathology, for example. It really means to understand the hidden processes. So what precedes the symptoms, what can be identified as something that comes before you feel, unwell. And well, for example, understanding how the brain, the emotional process, how the brain responds to emotional cues before the mood changes and you go into depression or anxiety, or how the physiological system, for example, heart rate, reacts to stress before the behaviors actually take place. Or again, how environmental exposure can impact child development before the child are born. And this is an approach that requires an integration of many disciplines. I was mentioning neuroscience, but also psychophysiology, clinical and developmental psychology, environmental sciences as well. And I really believe that in this interdisciplinarity lies the advancement in knowledge, because there is no single measure that can tell us the full story. You really need to see the thing from a different perspective, because the brain, the body, the environment, they are also interacting. They interact in every moment. And this early risk can appear in any of this domain, but they also in the way they interact. So you can have, for example, a predisposition to develop a certain condition, but if you live in a specific environment, this can, foster, accelerate the pace of the development of these symptoms, or in an opposite way in another environment. Maybe that particular gene, that particular trait that you have might not develop because other environmental factors are able to, I don't know, offset, for example, the development of anxiety or depression or other things. So again, the ultimate goal of the research that I would like to conduct is to understand this early signs, not just to know they are there, but also try a way to transform them in action, like in strategies to prevent, to create prevention for this condition. So creating what is called like personalized medicine, an approach that is tailored and targeted to the person, so to the specific needs of that person. And in this way, once again, we can really design intervention that are focused, that are personalized, that really, really work for that specific person with that specific characteristics, that lives in that specific environment, and that has that particular history, family history behind them. So yeah, the main idea is like reaching young people before problems even take root. So being able to intervene, like to create something, to do something before there is something like negative and like, problematic or psychopathologic. And so in this way, we could really try to do the best to make these children growing healthy and resilient adults. And that's, to me, is like the real meaning of science, trying to improve the people's life and trying to do the best we could do for other people.
Great. That's great. And I really hope that your research is successful and you have outcomes that you expect and more unexpected ones. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Libera. It was great, really good talking to you. I'm going to stop recording now.